Judy's here and Ginger Lane on their way down from Chicago over to Springfield, and they've made this sort of excursion to come and be here with us and talk with us this afternoon. So thank y'all very much for coming down. We thought the way that we could get started was we could maybe just go around and do introductions. The people who are here, say who you are. If you're working with the task force, say that you're with the task force. If you're on the staff or board of healthcare consumers, and some of you are more than one of those things, just identify who you are so that Judy and Ginger get a sense of who is here. And then I'll just do a very brief overview of the organization and the organizing effort, and then we'll just take it from there. And that was sort of at the request of Judy and Ginger, and then also, since we have some newer staff members here, it's good orientation as well. So, I don't know, Brooke, do you want to start?
Oh, goodness. I'm Brooke Anderson. I'm on staff with Healthcare Consumers. Thank y'all for coming.
I'm Bill Muller. I'm also on staff with Healthcare Consumers, and I do work with the task force.
I'm Jonna Scarla, and I am on staff.
Jim Holloman. I'm on the board of Champaign County Healthcare.
And I'm Claudia, and I'm the director of the Healthcare Consumers. And like Bill, I'm one of the staff members that works with the task force.
I'm Lana Wiggin, and I'm really nothing at this point.
So your hair's not true.
You're part of it. Barb's tried to get me involved, and I'm here now.
This is a recruitment effort in action.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes. There we go.
So you're now part of the task force.
Okay, and I'm Ginger Lane, and I'm with the Health Resource Center for Women with Disabilities, and I also work at an independent living center in Chicago.
Access Living, the famous Access Living.
Some think it's famous, some think it's infamous.
You know what you mean.
Right.
I'm Judy Henkel-Reese, and I'm the director of the Health Resource Center for Women with Disabilities at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago. And I'm really excited to be here. I'm also a colleague of Claudia's, Robert Wood Johnson Community Health leader. That's pretty cool.
I'm Barb Pritchard. I'm on the board of Healthcare Consumers, and I'm on the task force. And actually, I had the pleasure of first talking with you back in May through Ginger, which came from another person at Access Living. So, and I didn't realize what an awesome resource we've come across.
We've kind of gotten the ball rolling with us.
I'm Lynn Mullen, I'm working with the task force.
I'm Vicki Stewart, and I'm working with the task force. My office is next door to Healthcare Consumers. Puts me in place in the right neighborhood.
I'm Lisa Bourgeon, and I'm with the task force and with the board. I'm Paulette Coleman, and I'm on the staff of Healthcare Consumers.
I'm Marlena Bayless. I'm on the staff with Healthcare Consumers.
I'm Sharon Pan, I'm on staff also.
Okay. Well, thank y'all very much. And just very brief, I'm just going to do sort of a very brief overview and then really turn things over to Judy and Ginger and Barb. Basically, what I was explaining to Judy, we were talking earlier, and we talked in Phoenix recently when we were at a retreat for the Robert Wood Johnson Community Health Leaders Program. But the Champaign County Healthcare Consumers, I'm sorry, that is really annoying to me. We can open it up later after they're done sweeping the hallway. The Champaign County Healthcare Consumers was founded in 1977, and we describe ourselves as a grassroots citizen action organization dedicated to healthcare for all and ensuring that consumers have a voice in the healthcare system. And we believe in and practice participatory democracy. And so that's making sure that people, part of having a voice is making sure that you know the ways that you can hold government or corporations or institutions accountable. And so a lot of the work that we do, well, all of the work that we do is from a people's perspective. And the way that we do our work is through education, advocacy, and community organizing. And of course, our biggest victories have been won through community organizing. And we approach community organizing from an empowerment perspective that we work with the people who are most affected by a problem, first of all, to envision what the solution is or how it should be, and then to figure out the strategy for making their needs known and get the demands met and so on. And we work on a lot of different issues within healthcare. We also support other issues that are outside of healthcare, but that are social justice issues as well. But the way that we do community organizing is if we're actively community organizing around an issue, we usually form task forces or coalitions to work on that particular issue. And it just depends on the nature of the issue. One example where we formed a coalition was with public health. A few years ago, back in 1996, we had been hearing from people out in the community that they needed public health. We didn't have a public health department to serve the people living outside of Champaign-Urbana. So we found out that the way that you can create public health is through a voter referendum. There's a couple different ways, but that was the most secure way for the people. And it was very clear that with that issue and the enormity of it and the way that that we would have to organize a voter referendum, that it was the kind of issue where really it would be best to form a coalition where you go and reach out to organizations and get them on board and have them send representatives. That's actually how I got involved with healthcare consumers. I was a representative of this organization whose building we're in now, the Illinois Disciples Foundation. I was a representative to the Public Health Coalition, and that's how I got involved with healthcare consumers. I was a volunteer who attended meetings, represented the IDF in the Public Health Coalition, and there were a bunch of different organizations and of course individuals and so on. And we carried out a successful community organizing campaign, and we created a public health department. And we've had to watchdog it ever since. And we have a coalition meeting on Saturday coming up because there are still problems, but that's how we did that. In that case, we formed a coalition. It was very consciously a coalition, getting organizations on board. Other issues that we work on, it may be more of a task force because doesn't necessarily at that point lend itself to organizational involvement. It's sort of more individuals. One of the issues that we work on is we have a dialysis patients task force, and Jim Holloman is a board member who works on that task force as well. And that's a task force dedicated to improving care at the local dialysis facility for patients as well as caregivers, and there have been a lot of problems there. We're having some victories there. So anyway, that's kind of sometimes a difference whether we form a coalition or a task force. We've had a lot of success recently with women's health work. Brooke has been the lead organizer on that. We passed a law for contraceptive coverage and employer-based health insurance in the state of Illinois. And Brooke and others here helped organize to mobilize thousands of people to make sure that got passed. And then we are also probably nationally right now sort of most well known for our work around medical debt, and in particular nonprofit hospitals and how they deal with low-income patients. Our hospitals here in this community used to arrest and incarcerate low-income patients who couldn't pay their bills, and so we ended up, through our work, getting a front-page story in the Wall Street Journal, and then one thing led to another, and that sort of helped put an end to that practice. And we have an active coalition on the medical debt issue.
So your nonprofit hospitals?
Yeah. We can. I'll send you a packet of stuff. It's just outrageous. This morning, and so we formed a coalition around those issues, and then that coalition, for example, has a committee, a representative committee, that then goes and meets with the hospitals to help them change their practices. That's a nice way of saying what we do. We just had a meeting this morning with one of the hospitals. What else was I going to say? In terms of where sort of how this task force got started, it sort of grew out of an earlier organizing effort that had to do with the hospitals and their practices. And there was one hospital in particular that was just refusing to talk to us. They were laying off staff, and there were all kinds of problems going on. And we were having community meetings, and the hospital was taking out ads in the newspaper against, our organization, and things like that. It was very, very ugly. And
They're spending money.
Yeah. And what we did is we actually took all the ads that they took out, and we found out what they cost. And so at one of our next meetings, we laid them all out with dollar figures on them, and they had been laying off nurses and firing nurses who had been involved in actively organizing for improved patient care and working conditions and all that. And we sort of totaled up the cost of all the ads and said how many nurses' salaries that could have paid for and so on. But it was in that context of everybody being really upset that this hospital wouldn't talk to us, and there were so many changes at the hospital that we were having community meetings, and at one of the meetings, there were so many needs and demands, and so at one of the meetings, we sort of prioritized what, and categorized what are the different issues of concern. And one of the things that came up very clearly in one of those meetings was about access. Not financial access, but physical access and people's experiences at the hospital. And it sort of came up in the context of the hospital being inadequately staffed, and that the staff who were there didn't have the resources they needed to work with the patients. Like there was a seemingly an absence of Hoyer lifts and different things like that, staff not trained how to use them, and of course that impacts the patient as well as the staff member, and so there was common cause with the staff members around those issues. And then we formed a committee to kind of work on that, and in that committee, Barb was on that. She had been involved in the larger organizing effort with the hospitals, and then Barb, as a sort of very active community member who has all these connections, said, I'm going to call Vicki, and I'm going to call Lynn, and I'm going to call these people, and she sort of, that committee then turned into a task force with its own focus, and and that's sort of, and I don't know, Barb, if you have anything else to add, but that's sort of the history.
Well, it's mostly, I just kept hearing for years that, people were having problems, using Mavalier machines, getting on and off tables, and I got really annoyed. I got tired of feeling the lump of lead, getting lifted on and off tables. And, and I knew people that had similar problems, and it just seemed like a natural fit to do this task force on the healthcare consumers who'd already made some progress with the hospitals.
What's the name of the task force? You guys
We worked on the name for a really long time, and we may have to change it again, but right now it's Task Force on Physical Access to Medical Equipment.
Okay, all right, that's what I saw on the sign.
Task Force on Physical Access
To medical equipment.
to Medical Equipment.
We were trying to get away from, connecting access and medical issues meaning one thing, but
Yeah.
access
I know exactly what you're
meaning
talking about.
something
Yeah.
else.
And we may, I don't know, at our retreat, we even talked about, although we want to keep focusing on the medical equipment for now, because we think it's obviously important, it's winnable, and all of that, but there's other issues. There's, are the staff trained to
Sure.
use it, and,
Oh, yeah.
all of that, so.
Yeah. We have a new member here? Hi.
You're actually the first person I talked to, Paula.
That's right.
Yes. I'm not sure where we'll go from here, but
Well, I think we might want to start a little bit because we want to keep on our time. What I wanted to do is to start off with kind of a two-part story about how our Women's Center started and some of the things that worked for us and some of the challenges that it presented for us. And then talk to you about how that story kind of moved into where we are today in this room. Ginger and I are, and I can speak for her. Ginger and I are not sisters, even though we both use wheelchairs. When we travel together, I don't know if this ever happens to you guys, but
We're sisters in spirit.
I mean, people will say, "Oh, are you sisters?" Because like we're two people that we don't look anything alike. We have nothing in common except for the fact, and I don't even use the same kind of wheelchair. But the one thing we do have in common is that we were not born with our disabilities. We both became disabled after we had been adults, and Ginger's spinal cord injury, and I have a brain injury and rheumatoid arthritis. So becoming disabled was it was definitely a new phenomenon for both of us. And at the time that, after I became disabled, I got married and I wanted to have a child. And having been a patient at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, I went back to that hospital, which was a rehab hospital, not a regular acute care hospital, to find out what kind of resources they had for me as a new mom or a prospective mom. And at that time, RIC, which is what we call the rehab hospital, was still regarded as pretty much the #1 rehab hospital in the country. And I had a good experience there as an inpatient. So it made sense for me to go back there and talk to my nurses and my doctors, and they had no parenting resources for me. They had no mothering resources. They couldn't tell me, as a hemiplegic who only has use of half of my body, how I would go about changing my baby's diaper or bathe my baby, or how I would get my baby around given the fact that I didn't drive. And I was kind of in shock. So they sent me across this way to the Northwestern Memorial Hospital, which was a university-based hospital, to the Women's Hospital. So I went to the Women's Hospital, and they didn't have any resources for me either. So I went to Access Living, and at that time, Barca had not even become pregnant yet. And the Independent Living Center didn't have any resources for me. And I'm thinking, well, this is like really strange. I mean, what is it like? We're not supposed to have kids? Are we not supposed to? I mean, are the hospitals not thinking of us in terms of reproducing? Are they? What's going on here? And I knew I wanted to have a baby, but I really didn't know how I was going to handle a baby with only one half of my body, visual deficits, and not driving. So I started I started writing about this issue, and about the same time that I published a magazine on the issue, there were 2 women doctors at the rehab hospital in Chicago who were starting to notice something interesting about their women outpatients. And that is that they noticed that the women coming in their outpatient service were not getting basic reproductive health services. They weren't getting mammograms, they weren't getting pelvic exams, they weren't getting contraceptives, they weren't getting treated for menopause, they weren't getting treated for, they weren't even getting screened for sexually transmitted diseases, but there were services for men. And Ginger, if you want to kick in anytime. So, there were services, sexually supportive services for men. And so I was writing at this time. I don't know, what were you doing at this time?
Yeah, okay, around this time, I was, and I've never had any negative experiences with the healthcare system, but when I became spinal cord injured, and my rehab went fine. One of the things that I noticed was during the course of rehab, there were signs up around the building. And one of the signs that I found interesting was because spinal cord injury does often affect sexuality, there was a sign up that said, sexuality. Do you have questions? Or it's your right. Ask. So that was...
In the rehab hospital.
Yeah. What I learned later was that that was pretty unusual because they were giving us permission to ask and inquire. But about a year and a half after my discharge, I went up to Minnesota to have some surgery done on my hands. And when I was up there, I was admitted, I was admitted, and before they could do the surgery, they said, well, you have to have a chest x-ray. And here I'd had 3 children, and I'd always been able to go and have a chest x-ray. And I don't know if you even have it today. Pre-injury, yeah. And you can always get them. So I went down to x-ray, and the first thing they said was, well, here's our x-ray machine, come and stand over here. And I said, well, I can't. I don't stand. Well, you have to stand because you can't. What do you mean you can't stand? Just stand for a couple of minutes. I said, well, I don't stand. If I could stand for a couple of minutes, I'd be happy to oblige you. But I'm here, and if I have to have the x-ray, you have to do it. And it took a lot of arguing to and they said, you can't have the surgery unless we do a chest x-ray. And I said, I am not leaving this hospital without the surgery. So if you want me to have, if you don't want somebody screaming in your hospital, you're going to have to figure out a way to do the chest x-ray. Well, we'll hold you under your arms. I said, no, you won't hold me under my arms. Just stand me up. And so it took a lot of work, a lot of effort for them to arrange their equipment so that they could take a chest x-ray. So that was my very first experience in, with the healthcare system. And then, oddly enough, just shortly after that, I went for a gynae exam. I got my gynae exam at the Rehab Institute. But during that exam, the gynecologist, I said to him, because at that time I was 44, so I knew that, maybe I needed to start thinking about menopause and osteoporosis, and particularly given the fact that I don't do any weight bearing. And so I said to the gynecologist, do I need to start thinking about osteoporosis? When he said, this is a physician that was working right at RIC, and he said, well, you don't stand, so you don't have to worry about, about pressure and about your bones. And I said, so it's not an issue for you. And I said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't square. And I found myself educating my physician about spinal cord injury, osteoporosis, women over the age of 25, losing bone density, et cetera, et cetera. So that, got me interested in the whole process. And then right after that, the two physicians at the IC were also noticing that their patients coming into the clinic were not getting basic reproductive health care. As Judy said, they weren't getting mammograms, they weren't getting pap smears, and they were being told that if they wanted to get examined in an acute care hospital, they needed to bring their own personal assistant to transfer them onto the examination table.
Or they wouldn't get services.
They wouldn't get services.
With people that were turned down services if they didn't have their own personal care attendant with them. And people were getting misinformation. People were getting, people were told to never get pregnant, or for various reasons, or told that they couldn't get pregnant even though they could. I mean, there was just a lot of misinformation. And a lot of the women in Chicago became very distrustful of the healthcare, experiences that they had. And as a result of that, we started organizing with different disabled women in the Chicago area, different disabilities, sensory disabilities, cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities. And we'd meet with the doctors, the two women doctors, a couple times a year just to hear people's stories, what their experiences were. And we started realizing that a lot of our stories were the same and our experiences were the same. And like Ginger was talking about the x-ray, and other people were talking about having really horrible situations like doctors or family members coercing them to giving up their kids for adoption because they had disabilities, or coercing them to end pregnancies, or have tubal ligations, have their tubes tied,
Or sterilization actually in their teens.
And everybody knew their own story, but until we would go around the room and start hearing all of these stories, and as I said, people kept bringing other members into the group, and it started becoming clear to us that there were a lot of problems, and we had to start thinking about how we wanted to address them. So the thing in Chicago was, we first wanted to make sure we needed some what we call accessible, user-friendly services. And we decided to work with these two women physicians to set up a small clinic at the rehab hospital that later became part of the Health Resource Center for Women with Disabilities. But I must tell you, and I want to stress this all to you, we are not here to ever advocate separate clinics, okay?
Now, but one of the things that was really to our advantage was that these two women physiatrists were of a mindset to want to include consumers right from the
Right.
get-go.
They reached out to us.
They came to us and they said, we want, we think these services need to be provided, but we need input from the consumer population. And so it's light years ahead of what
Yeah.
sounds like is happening.
Yeah,
and
and
has been
the
happening
leadership
down
wasn't that in light, and they did listen to us. And one of the things that Ginger and Marka and I said is that you have got to get disabled people involved in any kind of healthcare program you set up here for women in authoritative positions. Because we need to see people like ourselves. We are social workers, we are nurses, we are business women. We have the backgrounds. It's just, if anybody should be running a disabled women's center, it should be us. And so that, these two women physicians heard that, but it was a question of how we were going to make that happen.
And we had quite a struggle. I mean, it was a long time ironing out, really in our own minds, do we want our own center, our own freestanding center? Do we want to be affiliated with this rehab hospital? If we are affiliated with them, will we be co-opted by them? What kind of role will we play? And we had a lot of meetings about that in establishing the center. There was even talk initially about, should this only be, the board that we formed, should it only include women with disabilities? Should it not include the two physiatrists? Should it not include, there were a couple of social workers at the time who were interested in this issue and in being on the board and working with us. And there was some dissension, but clearly we felt that it was in all of our best interest to work together, sort of a coalition type of setting.
Because we got along with the two women. You bring up a point I want to mention to this group. There's a resource in here that I can pull out for you later, but most of us working in disability healthcare access these days are always advocating for the inclusion of disabled professionals in the healthcare setting. It goes hand in hand with the equipment, okay? Thing is what I'm saying is, we do want healthcare access. Yes, we want physical access to equipment, and we do want education and training so people can provide disability competent services. But by and large, we want nurses hired with disabilities, we want physicians hired with disabilities, we want OTs, PTs, we want to make sure that the medical, and we do a lot of work in that area at, Ginger and I do, and our Women's Center, and Dr. Kirshner, who is our medical colleague, does a lot of work on the whole medical education front, trying to make sure that people that are educating future medical providers are reaching out to people with disabilities in the healthcare profession. So that's just an aside, but it's something that, because we always feel that the more people with disabilities that are professionals that are involved professionally in healthcare issues, the better of a chance we have of getting the physical access, because those are the decision makers and those are the policy makers. So
But that's not to say that non-professionals, consumers, shouldn't have a very strong voice and be respected
for who
as
we are, right,
for who we are and as users of the healthcare system.
right.
There's maybe particularly in the healthcare system, there is a hierarchy. And that hierarchy is the more degrees you have, the more respected you are. And you're not listened to if you don't have those professional degrees. And we know that, I know that working at an independent living center where we take those degrees and say, we don't need them. that doesn't make us, a degree doesn't make you an expert in a field. And so I'm saying that because I want to emphasize that whoever's in this room or any people that you,
No, you don't need it
that
to
you
be
don't
an authority
need a
on your
degree.
disability or your healthcare needs. But at
Right.
the same time, we are advocating for the nursing schools, the medical schools, et cetera.
Absolutely.
So, what ended up happening is we, as Ginger said, we kind of created a coalition with these, with the healthcare staff and the administrative staff at the rehab hospital. And we
That's
ended
a bit more of a partnership.
a partnership, right? But I mean, the thing is that we as a community always had concerns about segregating disability health services from the mainstream setting. So we decided this. We decided that a lot of women just felt safer in our clinic, even though Ginger had, a guy that was there that was giving her misinformation. But there were people that had such bad experiences, being forced to give up their kids, being forced to have abortions, not given the right type of contraceptives, that they really wanted to work, they wanted to go into a clinic where people weren't staring at them because they had a disability, or people were regarding them as sexually active and supporting their reproductive desires. So what we decided to do is we kept the clinic, and we were committed to two things. One was to promoting the idea of self-determination. We wanted women to be able to have a choice. We didn't want the segregated clinic in our rehab hospital being the only choice for disabled women in town to go to get a disability-sensitive gynae examination. We wanted that to be part of a spectrum, and we wanted them to be able to go into any women's clinic, any women's health center in the city of Chicago or in the state of Illinois, and feel that they would be in safe and good hands. So as part of our mission, because we work in a university-based hospital, and we work with these great women physicians, we made it part of our mission to start educating providers outside of our hospital. So we do a lot of work with medical students, we do a lot of work with nursing schools, OT schools, University of Illinois, Loyola, Northwestern, in Chicago, to just start educating students in the healthcare profession about the need for disability competent healthcare services, is the word I'm gonna say. So, I mean, we ended up kind of finding our own balance in Chicago. And I mean, there are people that have, women with disabilities that have never set foot in our clinic. And they don't have to. They're fine with their gynecologist, or they're fine with their local hospital. And then there are people that have done both. And so, the center, it's got this clinic that's got both physiatrists who are doctors that work with those of us in the rehab setting, and gynecologists who are pretty knowledgeable about disability. And we have 3 providers now. We have a nurse practitioner and 2 physicians.
One of the things that we had to do pretty early on was to actually go to the women's hospital at Northwestern and have some in-services with them particularly around mammography.
Right.
And some of the attitudinal biases that exist in working with women with disabilities, and just how to work with us, how to help position us, for exams, and stay away from making us feel that it's our problem if we can't get a good mammogram.
I think, for example, when we did these in-services with the mammography technicians, we were explaining, they were asking us questions like, is it okay to ask what's wrong with you or what happened to you? And we said, generally those are not, very, they're not questions that we welcome.
Right. Or even things like, I had to put on my examination gown in a closet where there were mops and brooms and pails, and because I couldn't fit into the regular changing room. The door was not, the opening wasn't accessible for a wheelchair. And so those were some of the things that we had to educate them
Transportation.
about. Transportation, which is a huge issue because we have to rely on paratransit, and our rides often are late. And then they said, well, you're late for your appointment, forget it. And we said, no, we didn't cancel, but it's not, it's because transportation was late. So all that kind of advocating around
I
those
think the
issues.
in-service thing, I forgot that we did go over to the hospitals to do in-services. And it is true that the best source of knowledge for getting your healthcare needs is for you to provide that to the educator and getting them somehow receptive to that. We were pretty fortunate because we were in this university setting and we had some links on our hospital staff with the medical faculty and staff next door.
Right. One of the other things that we did that was really driven a lot by Dr. Kirshner and by by Carol Gill, the psychologist who has a disability and is now over at the University of Illinois, Chicago. It was the impetus to make a film for healthcare providers on issues of women with disabilities.
Which we have.
And we have that. And that has been disseminated to many, many medical schools around the country. And that, it took a long time, of course, to make that. But getting interviews by a lot of our women talking about, I think it's divided into what, 5 segments?
Right, yeah. That's a good idea, because I think that's something that you guys might want to, Dr. Kirshner has it for sale. It's called Learning to Act in Partnership, and it's basically an educational video that features women with disabilities and our healthcare providers. I'm going to get out of the women's thing because I want to jump ahead a little bit. So after we set up this center and we took it upon ourselves to make sure that people knew that our goal in life was not to create a whole bunch of segregated settings in healthcare for people with disabilities, but that they really had to find that balance in their own communities. We started hearing stories from men with disabilities. Mostly Ginger was getting a lot of these stories over at Access Living, who were, running into problems like Ginger had with the X-ray machine, or getting an EKG, and more people were starting to run into general problems. They weren't necessarily gender specific, but the women were kind of more dramatic, and men that couldn't get out of the inpatient bed because there wasn't a Hoyer lift, and they were never or they couldn't use the bathroom in their hospital room because the bathroom was inaccessible. And it started becoming clear to us that the issues that were pretty dramatic around women, and I will tell you this, when you go to the press, you might want to start with the women's issues because they are most dramatic in terms of getting media coverage.
Especially things like mastectomies that have happened because mammography machines weren't
You can't
accessible.
prove it for sure, but you can't prove it for sure.
Right.
But so we started, hearing that men were basically experiencing the same kinds of problems, but as I said, they weren't highlighted as much because with women, there's always this overtone of a eugenic thing where we're being degenderized and we're being, really forced to not have kids, which is pretty dramatic.
Or we're seen as not being sexual.
Right.
To begin with. Part of my first gynae exam with this physician, aside from the osteoporosis issue, was he never asked me one question about whether I was sexually active. He just assumed, well, now I'm disabled, I'm not. So no questions about it.
So that's why would he ask you if you needed a contraceptive if he doesn't see you as sexual? Or why would he ask you about sexually transmitted diseases? He wouldn't.
Right.
So, we had, the thing is that educating your community of healthcare providers, whoever you're going to be working with, it's going to be up to you to do that. There's no way they're going to just get that from reading, or they're going to get it from a movie or a book. It takes little steps over time. So what I wanted to say is that we started noticing that, in the larger healthcare setting, men with disabilities were running into just as many problems. They weren't you know, they were on general acute care services. And a couple of years ago, we had a wheelchair user who works at DREDF. Her name is Mary Lou Breslin, and she's one of the co-authors in our white paper here. Came to our hospital to talk to us about healthcare access. She was out in California, and she was starting to talk about all of the problems that people with disabilities had in California in terms of being forced to get examined in their wheelchairs because of the lack of accessible tables and the people that weren't getting lifted because there weren't lifting teams and there weren't Hoyer lifts. So she gave this big talk at our hospital about this. And after she finished talking, I went up to her and I said, this has got to be going on all over the country. I mean, it's obviously a big problem in California. It's what caused us to start our women's center in Chicago. And we know we're not alone. And we know that there are men and women with disabilities, whether they're hearing impaired, they're visually impaired, they have speech impairments. And they're just, people don't see, they seem to get it. They seem to understand that they're entitled to accessible housing. They seem to understand, meaning disabled folks, seem to understand that we need transportation, we need housing, we need education. But the healthcare, for some reason, doesn't seem to be as pressing of an issue for people to organize around as it, I mean, in the disability community. It was a lot more sensitive because people were, you know, I mean, we were all pretty much burnt out trying to get lifts on trains and buses and trying to get into universities and schools. So healthcare seemed to be the last frontier, but so Mary Lou and I started talking about why there weren't more advocacy efforts in a big city like Chicago where people were encountering so many problems. I mean, every disabled person you talk to, all you'd have to do is say, what was your latest horror story going into to get a doctor's appointment or a hospital anywhere? And everybody had stories. But no, you know, there was not like any kind of effort really to do anything on a citywide basis or even on a national-wide basis. So when I talked to Mary Lou from California, that's when we first came up with the idea of putting together, like doing all the research that there existed on this body of literature about disability competent healthcare access is what we called it. We started to look into the few complaints that have been filed with the Department of Justice about healthcare access discrimination on the part of disabled folks. And one of the things that Mary Lou found, which she put together very nicely in this paper, she started to itemize all the reasons why people with disabilities did not advocate more or file complaints about inequities that they experienced in their healthcare setting. Discrimination, being forced to be examined in your wheelchair or being even denied, a service because they didn't have a sign language interpreter or because of another disability, lack of accommodation. And she's found that people with disabilities, often feel very loyal to their healthcare providers because they've been seeing the same healthcare providers and they have a special relationship with this doctor or this nurse or this hospital or this clinic, and they somehow feel that if they bring, some kind of, inequity or limitation to the attention of that doctor or that nurse or that hospital, that they're going to somehow lose their goodwill with that physician, and they really want to keep that relationship. So there was, that was one disincentive that people had, and then other things where people were just very burnt out. They were burnt out every day. They were just trying to get, around on transportation. They were just trying to get jobs. They were just trying to get housing. They were just trying to keep their Social Security payments. And healthcare access and healthcare advocacy didn't seem like, was like right in that survival category of food, transportation, and housing. So it was another reason why people didn't organize with disabilities around this issue. And another thing that they found, that she identified here, is that a lot of us are just too sick. We don't like to think of ourselves as sick, but we have a woman right now, if I can tell you, in our women's center who is a quadriplegic, uses a electric chair and power chair, and who was diagnosed with a uterine cancer. And she's very, very sick right now, and she's encountered a whole host of problems at a hospital in the area that does not have accessible examining tables. She was forced to be transferred from her wheelchair by armed security guards in the hospital, which is, these armed security guards were not trained on transferring her. She was humiliated. She was afraid she was going to be dropped. We don't see this as ADA compliant healthcare, but she's very sick. She's got cancer and she's a quadriplegic. She's got very little energy. The last thing she's got on her mind right now is filing a complaint with the DOJ because she's just trying to make it from day to day. So that was another disincentive. So I'm identifying these disincentives because they're real and they're barriers to all of us in the disability community. We all know from working in healthcare access that healthcare access is a hard thing often to get people to mobilize around even without disabilities. But I'm telling you that, for those of us that have chosen to do this in the area of disability, that we've got some barriers that we want to be attentive to so we can overcome them and work to dismantle them. I think it's very important for us to understand. I remember Barbara when I first talked to you, I said, we're gonna, until you're actually in the situation yourself, in the long run, the lack of access in a hospital will cause safety concerns. It will cause errors and misdiagnoses, and we don't want to wait, until people are misdiagnosed or until they're dropped, which is going on. And a lot of people are being dropped and still not even reporting it.
Right, oh yeah. One of the things that we found was that one of the hospitals in Chicago had a committee, a disability committee, and they internally had their own task force.
They call it
It's
their
an ADA
task
committee, right.
They're mentioned in this paper,
right.
the Rush Hospital.
And they've done a lot of work to make their hospital physically, programmatically, and attitudinally accessible. But of course, a lot of the physical access is constrained because of the costs in a huge
But
hospital.
what they do, and if I were you guys, what I would do is on my acknowledgement page in the white paper, there's a special acknowledgement to Rush Hospital, and we talk about their ADA committee. And they're also mentioned in the resource section. I would get in touch with Rush and ask them to send you their ADA committee information because they have done such a nice job. They know that they don't have a ton of money to make all the changes at one time, but they do have an ADA committee that's made up of both disabled consumers in the city and healthcare staff, physicians, high-level staff, directors. So they have this nice group of consumers with disabilities and healthcare providers on staff within the hospital that make up the ADA committee. And they have people that can make changes. So what they do is they take a little bit of money every year and they all vote on which ADA revision they're going to make. Are they going to get a new mammogram machine this year? Are they going to get another high-low table? Whatever. So there's some kind of community input on how they're going to use their limited funds to make their hospital more disability competent. And that's one model that you might want to look at. Since it is, it's really the program that we found when we were doing the research on this paper that was really the hospital was taking the initiative. They were wise to take the initiative, and the disabled folks were responding to that.
I don't know that it was initially the administration of the hospital that took the initiative, but a couple of their staff did. But they then went to the administration and found some receptive ears there. And that was what was so so important. So they all began to advocate for making some of these changes. And of course, because it's called the ADA committee, it's law. So they had to become compliant wherever they could with reasonable accommodation and undue hardship.
So, I mean, somehow, I don't know what kind of players you've got inside your hospitals. I mean, ideally, as you all know, you really want to try to identify people who are going to be sympathetic, one word, or open-minded to working with you, to understand that it's people that have some kind of ability to help affect change. I mean, are there people like that?
Well, we kind of have two different camps because each of the hospitals are in different points of that. So we're at different points of that. For MENA, which is a hospital that helps consumers who don't want to work at, healthcare consumers through some of their other work, actually got the administration changed. So there's a new director in the hospital, and has got, and Bill, if I'm saying any of this wrong or anybody else from healthcare consumers, correct me, but they've got a good communications with the director. So what I found, or what our group has found, is that when we email the person working on some of the issues we raised and kept him copied on the email, we tended to get a response.
Okay.
Until recently, when we brought up the issue of the counter height being, we have a picture of the counter in the women's health unit, the reception counter is over Lynn's head. So Lynn parked herself under the counter and we took a picture.
Did you get an article, or did you get the media to cover it?
We haven't yet announced, that's one of the things we're talking about Saturday is one of the things we want to do in the near future is kind of do a press release to announce our whole task force.
Yeah.
We've kind of been
Get your
formulating.
stories together.
Mhm.
Try to get, stories of, and I would get stories of men and women,
Mhm.
because,
We do have a couple of men in between
Yeah.
us and some
And,
meetings as well.
Claudia's should be pretty good about helping you with the press stuff.
Can we borrow, and not stories so much, but can we borrow, like, we're working on building a fact sheet for our group, and we're wondering if we can use some of the information from the white paper.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The proper acknowledgement.
Yeah,
and things like that.
just let me know how you want to frame that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I will do whatever I can. I mean, I'll work with you and Claudia too. I mean, because the way I see it is a win-win, because we're trying to get more attention to the paper nationally, because we feel like the more attention the other hospitals and healthcare settings across the country, I mean, if we can get some change in Champaign by using the paper, it'll give us more chance of getting change in Springfield and Missouri, or wherever. I mean, I think the hospital that we work in is very much into helping promote media on this to an extent, but they can't do it here. But if there's a way that we can work with you, in your media efforts here to do that, I would just, Claudia and I attended a session when we were, I think Claudia was there. It was actually a media session on community health organizing and how to get local media involved in smaller community health issues. There might, be a way to do this, but what you guys do need, you need real life stories.
Right.
Oh, we have those. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Pretty
We
much
figured you
everybody in
did.
the room around this table has several stories.
Would
I'm-
it be better for us to try to engage some of the people at the hospital, like in physical therapy, maybe get them on our committee before going to the media and showing it almost as cooperation, or would that take away somehow from, the hospital would say, oh great, we've got our coverage and it looks good.
Well, I don't think I would go to the press until I had a pretty clear idea of what kind of solutions I was looking for, and maybe had tried to talk to the hospital. For example, let's just use the example of the ADA committee as being a goal that you might want to try to work out with this hospital. I mean, I don't know how much organizing you guys have done around disability issues in Champaign. I know, Barbara, you're saying a lot, since the city was so accessible that a lot of people didn't have to organize that much. But, in other words, my experience in Chicago around healthcare and transportation has always been, we usually start with a reasonable goal, like let's get a lift on the buses or whatever. And we go to the agency and they always say no. And then we say, well, why not? And they say, well, it would cost X amount of money. And then we come back and show them why it's gonna be worth it, or why, and they still say no. And then, after they've said no a few times, we start, lighten it up a little bit. And I would give them a chance to say yes to whatever it is that you're looking, what you guys decide your goals are, whether it is to get more equipment and maybe get an ADA, committee within the hospital. I think you want to use your media wisely. My sense is, I don't know, Ginger, what's your thought?
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, my first thought was if you can find a couple of people within the hospital system who will advocate with you, and you may find them up in the administration. Probably not, but you might. Then you're not working against each other, and that would be a more preferable to having a really antagonistic relationship if it's possible.
I think you guys got to be clear on exactly what you want and making sure it's something that A, is reasonable, and B, that it's something that, that you can help them maybe find a way to accommodate. You might have short-term strategies, short-term goals and long-term goals.
Yeah, we do that. We do.
Okay.
Primarily, we were looking at getting exam tables over a period of time, like one maybe in each department, and then increasing that as they do buying over the years.
And who have you talked to about that?
Neither hospital have gotten to ask that point because we decided to push one of the local hospitals on the counter issue because it's definitely out of compliance with the ADA, and we figured we'd use that as leverage.
Okay, but is a counter issue, which is the higher priority in terms of healthcare?
Well, I think we disagree on that, the
Okay.
one in the committee, because to me, the counter issue, and I said this in our goal setting meeting, to me was, yes, it's important, but to me, the access to the mammogram machine beyond the counter was more important, because that's literally a life and death issue for some of our people. So, I wanted to primarily focus on getting those things accessible, access to them. One of the things that brought Barb and I toward this was a mammogram issue for one of our friends, and for ourselves with the paddle. I'm very short, so I have complicated accessible.
Do you guys have any accessible mammography machines in the area?
They do lower down, but they don't lower down enough for someone who's 4'2",
Okay.
sitting down. And standing up on 4'2".
Techie.
A techie can stand.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. So if you're below, and that, right now there may not exist.
So we had come up with other solutions for that, like
Oh.
a ramp, like a platform or a riser or
Okay.
something you could use. So to me, those are the more pressing issues that I would like to see us go at. To me, that counter height is already in violation of ADAC. You're gonna have to do something about it.
Well, it's in violation, but it really,
Right, but
if there are reasonable accommodations that can be made for a counter issue.
right, but this is a brand new building.
See, the brand new thing is pretty.
It is brand new off the foundations within the last few years.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
Within the last year, because we did it in December, it opened in.
Is this the
November
private
last
hospital or the?
This building is, and see, this is where we also have some commonality, and, and I agree with Lynn on the mammogram, but I think we also have an opportunity to do both, because this is the building where the dialysis facility is located. We have a dialysis task force who's had problems. It's a medical building that is on the hospital campus. It's right in front of the hospital. First floor is dialysis, and then I can't remember if it's third floor is where the women's. or
You go
second-
around the other side and you
Yeah.
have to come in the other way. There's a lot of physical access problems in accessibility.
This is the new building.
This is a brand spanking
A
new
new
building.
building, and the entrance into the dialysis facility, we had to fight to get them to relook at the ramp. It wasn't even graded.
It wasn't-
right. It wasn't even graded.
It wasn't to
right.
code?
It wasn't to code.
No.
So then you've got some issues with with architects, with the Illinois Accessibility Code. I mean, you've got some legal standings.
Right.
If
Right,
the- if
that's what
things
I'm
are not
saying.
built to code.
But we know that that building wasn't to code. We know those things, and legally, we've got every way to stand on it.
Okay,
But I was thinking that when we were trying to get attention for medical access too, I mean, to me, the counter is important. It's kind of a physical and emotional barrier, and the reasons they give for the counter height are HIPAA, which is definitely not true.
what?
HIPAA's an excuse for everything.
It sounds like
Wait a minute, how could they use HIPAA for a counter
For
height?
privacy. Yes, that's what they're saying.
It's an excuse for everything.
Whatever happened to a separate area?
I don't think people should be putting their stuff over the counter anyway, but the idea is we kind of disagree a little bit of that. But I think that, that building not being accessible, we got the law on our side on that one.
But
And I
nothing
would
will
like-
happen.
But it still should be there. I mean, it's still part of what we do.
Right.
Okay,
But
so,
the drive toward getting those accessible exam table is, to me, extremely important.
yeah,
And the mammogram machine being useful is extremely important. Because if you can't get those mammograms, you can't get early detection.
Right, so it sounds like, but you haven't, you've had some meetings with, is this the private hospital or the not-for-profit hospital?
They're
They're
both
both
they're
not
both.
for profit. We only
They're
have
both-
two.
So maybe what you're looking at is I was going to say prioritize and start with one, but this sounds like you need a two-prong approach.
See,
And,
Ginger, I'm thinking, I mean, like, obviously with the ADA violation, if they went in right away with that, and, I mean, since it should be a slam dunk, I mean, I don't, it all depends, I mean, what kind of legal resources do you have here?
I thought you guys were our legal resource.
Okay, I will put you in touch with anybody in Dredif like I did with Barbara, and they're very knowledgeable, but somehow one of the goals of this group has gotta be, you guys gotta get some really solid, do you have private attorneys in town that'll work with you? I mean, that's how we really did it in Chicago. We started off with private attorneys, that just had to really do this, what do you call that? Pro bono. Right. I mean, that's what we did. Chicago. I mean, that's how we basically did everything. We didn't start off with disability knowledgeable attorneys necessarily, and we didn't start out with attorneys. And these were all attorneys that were doing this out of the goodness of their heart,
Yeah.
who were willing to start working with us, and then ended up becoming disability competent and aware attorneys. But they weren't there when we started on transportation. I know that they were working on
Yeah.
transportation.
I think we can get some. The other thing is in terms of the architectural stuff, it doesn't just affect the women's health, it affects the dialysis, and that's a task force that's very active and that has been, and we've now gotten meetings with a representative of the development corporation that built the building and all of that, and at the last meeting of that where we mentioned something about, there's something that's not to code, and we mentioned that, and I said something about ADA standards and all that, and several people in the room knew that sort of triggered for them a little bit of a reaction because they know that there are legal issues there.
See,
So we may have some momentum sort of
Combine it.
combined.
I think
Okay.
you need to combine it and you need to
I think you
mention it.
gotta combine it. I just tell you my gut feeling, and I'm open to, I don't live down here, and I'm open to any modification, but my gut feeling is try to identify some solid attorneys that are willing to educate themselves to work with you on this. They might be green, but believe me, as they get involved in it, they'll see it. And when you talk to them, find out exactly, where the violations are and how, how blatant they are, et cetera. Before you do anything in court, as I was suggesting before you even went to the media, my feeling is always try to, since the goal of your group is to advocate and educate, always go in, but first consult your attorneys, know your legal, stature on all of these issues, and then go in and have some very specific, just say, I don't know what you're gonna, I don't know at this point what you do once they've already, defied the code. I mean, do you just ask them to tear down this stuff and rebuild it, or what?
Basically, we asked them to lower the counter height
Okay.
because it's not gonna be that major.
And they have said no?
They haven't
They
responded,
haven't responded.
so we haven't.
well, but that's a counter issue. You're mentioning a
There's
the
other-
But they regraded that. didn't they?
access issue.
They regraded that, there's
They
other issues.
regraded that.
There's doors and
See,
things like that.
I'm just wondering if they should, you know, see, my feeling is if they start heavy with the ADA stuff, and they have a solid case, and they go in there, and they just keep getting turned down, or they're getting ignored, then they should go after them legally. And because the reason being is because once you do win that victory, they do pay more attention to you.
Yes, they do.
They just do. I mean, it happened to us. I mean, but we never started off suing. We never started out litigating. We always came in educating and advocating. It was till they kept, and I mean, they generally just keep putting up the barriers and keep telling you why they can't do it, or why they won't do it, or why it's too expensive. And then after a while, you know, then you make your move and you say, well, fine, I don't know how much time it is. It's time to I mean, so you gotta work with attorneys who will be willing to go with you once they realize that there is a legitimate case there. I mean, I think the first thing you gotta identify is what's your case. The hospital equipment is a less clear ADA case, as Dredif was telling us when we were on the phone, and Bill, you were in that conversation. I mean, that gets a little more sensitive because we've got to pretty much argue that that's not safe or patient-centered care if the tables aren't accessible, and then you've got to have specific people possibly filing complaints with the Department of Justice. I mean, there needs to be a lot of community education about that and all that.
One issue with the mammography machine, there was a victory there, but then they haven't followed through on that next step, like Lynn is talking about, where they said, oh, we'll have somebody come in and look at building a platform and whatever. One thing, and this doesn't excuse that, but one thing that may give it a little context, I just found this out. I was out of the room because I was doing an interview. There's a story that's going to be on TV tonight about the hospital had to lay off some staff, and they had to lay off some staff because the clinic has lost like 17 physicians this year alone. And they're very mismanaged, the clinic, the hospital's trying. But one of the things that I found out yesterday or the other day from the hospital CEO is with the mammography machine, it's digital mammography, brand new, all that stuff. The clinic docs are not referring people. So that mammography machine is hardly being used at all. And I don't.
One in the women's center?
Yeah.
When you say the clinic docs are not referring,
Where are they referring?
Well, the clinic the clinic has its own mammogram machine.
Well, yeah, I mean, what we have to remember too, that it isn't all the Clavina Covenant and that are the smaller of the two hospitals in town. And the larger, Carl, and their subsidiary clinics that are all over the area, we have problems with them. I mean, so I think that for my thinking is we've got a slam dunk case on that one little building, but again, that's one little
yeah,
provider.
but how much
But I
of a
want to get into
reputation,
the big one.
yeah, how much of a reputation does this healthcare consumers group have around disability access issues right now in this town? That's what I want to know.
No.
I mean, you gotta make your mark.
Yeah.
And I think
I mean,
that's
it
why
seems like you said right now, a lot of your attention nationally and locally has been hospital debt.
Yeah, and other.
And that's fine,
issues.
that's good. But at the same time, you wanna say we're a player here.
Mhm.
This is, you know, disability, we're into access issues.
Mhm.
And that's why, I mean, I understand you wanna get to the big stuff, but we all do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, this town has for the most part been very receptive to making things accessible. We have outside corporations coming in now,
Mhm.
buying some of this up, especially with Covina. I mean, it's kind of merged and pulled in other people, so that's what you're seeing, I think. And they're not as sensitive as maybe the town people used to
Oh,
be.
because they're more corporate.
They're more corporate.
But then they would be more interested in avoiding litigation too.
Yeah. I mean,
And
yeah.
bad press, mostly if they're new.
Bad press.
Yeah, and I think part of what we've talked about is, just like we had been doing the hospital stuff, and that gave entree for the group to go and meet with the women's health people at Provena. I mean, that's how that meeting happened, because there were relationships, there
Right.
had been a power-based bill, they kind of knew, I mean, they were friendly,
Right.
but they also knew that if they said no, that it might be a return to the days when we were protesting because
Right.
they refused a very reasonable request. So, and hopefully if we can make some changes, even if it's, at the Women's Health Center at Provena, you know, we can take that then and go to Carl and say,
See, that's what I
we
think.
worked well with
See, that's why
Provena,
and that's why I would
going to
start,
work with you now.
I would go
Yeah.
with the smaller, solid victory first.
Yeah.
Because even if it's small, it's something that,
Yeah, it is small and it is there, but
but it,
like the title of your white paper says, it's more than ramps, and that's the position
I
I want
see
to
what you're
take
saying.
through.
Okay,
To me, the counter is a problem. It's symbolic of people not following the current laws, but it's not the problem.
right, I understand it. Now, let's just remember that there was a time where there were no ramps, okay?
I know.
See, right now, I see, this is, when you're old like Ginger and me,
I'm not that young.
all I gotta say, so we gotta remember that, okay, we're saying, well, okay, now we're beyond ramps, because there's ramps. Well, I mean, there was a point in time not too long ago where we were just trying to get ramps. Okay, what I'm saying is that I think that even if you have that small victory, even if it's a small one, like you were saying, you can generalize it to another healthcare setting. I think you can even, like Barbara and I were talking about, if you cite the white paper, I'd be more than happy to help you go national with the press on it. I mean, what I'm saying is I think that my experience is go for the sure thing on the smaller and build your way up. Because for this larger issue, I'm sorry, your name again?
Oh, yeah.
Lynn, right? Lynn, these are policy issues, and they're not necessarily going to be slam dunks in a courtroom. When you were out of the room, Claudia, we were urging your group to take a look at Rush Hospital that we acknowledge in our acknowledgements. They're also in the resource section under best practices. They have a wonderful ADA committee model in their hospital, that their hospital set up, which combines disabled consumers and hospital staff, and they make joint decisions about how they're gonna spend their ADA money every year on which ADA improvements they're gonna make. I mean, you could get to
And they really
this.
prioritize
Yeah, I
some
mean,
of their needs.
so somewhere along the line, it seems to me that you would want ADA staff, you would
Right.
want an ADA task force within every hospital.
Right, and that's one of the things that we talked about at the retreat, because we looked at short-term goals, and then we looked at intermediate goals, and of course, one builds on the other, but one of the things that we would like to do is try to get, a set of principles or commitments that the providers are going to commit to, and several of us are gonna work on what those are, but we wanted to draw out of, when we did read, a lot of us read the paper, and we read best practices, and then also some of the things that came out of lawsuits, like where the provider said, we're now gonna have an ADA advocate person. So we're gonna try to draw on some of that
Right.
to get the hospitals and providers, and we're not there yet, obviously, but with enough pressure, hopefully, that they commit to doing this, and they set a timeline for implementing it.
I think there is a way, an opportunity right now, because the hospital is in such stress because of the Provena thing, to do what we talked about a little bit earlier, which is to recruit people from the hospital, even going through the administration. I think it's a really good idea to join our committee. And if we got an ADA committee established like Rush, then that's one up on the other hospital, and then maybe they'll also respond and do what you'd like.
When I think of, okay, if you're gonna go to the press, and it goes out there, and if our big issue is a counter knife, even as I've been working in disability rights a long time, would not be impressed. You know what I'm saying?
That's what we were talking about.
That's the kind of thing, I think we need to pick the battle and make sure it's a good one.
Well, not to belabor this, because we can do this.
Okay.
But I think we picked it too because we thought we could take it to the Attorney General's office and it would be minimal.
Right, that's what I'm saying,
And
let's
just do that as the beginning thing and get us maybe just more.
And the press can do the stories of the
Right.
pornography and all of that.
well, they could, I think it's just,
All that information.
it'll just flow. But I think that when we're focused on what we're doing, it's got to be the whole picture, the whole thing. And don't get distracted by a little thing.
Yeah, I can understand.
With victories and with concern, that especially things that are structural with building, it wouldn't be, if we were to even talk about the counter, I think it would be in the context of, here's what else is wrong, that was wrong with this new
That's what
building.
I'm saying, that's
And-
what's wrong with this.
Yeah.
Or, and how does, and more importantly, how does that prevent somebody
Right.
from getting the needed health care?
Right.
That's what needs to be
Right.
shown. And more than, even though we all know that inaccessible high counters create distance and are not, don't support dignity, that's not the issue, I mean, that's not the important
Right.
issue. The important issue is, how does it prevent me from getting my health care needs met,
You know,
addressed?
you could use the counter as just, you know,
It's the barrier.
as a metaphor
Here's where it
for
starts.
the fact that we don't exist.
Yeah.
We're invisible.
Well, it could be the good, you know, the cover page of our pamphlet.
Yeah, I mean, you know, do you see us or,
Yeah.
do you see me?
You
or
get somebody in a wheelchair that's real small, and then make this enormously high counter. You know,
Well,
Well, we already have the shop.
All right, and then have a staff person behind it, and you know,
And then, you know what, and then underneath it, you just say, this is just the tip of the iceberg,
Right.
you know, that kind of deal.
Well, you can do that in almost every facility around town. Carl has been getting much better about where they build their new facilities, they're putting in the lower counter heights. I did notice that. For Vina, I was really shocked that they still had the high ones. In their older facilities, Carl still has some of the high countertops.
They've been taking those out.
Yeah, they've been changing them out. Well, they put in the Mattis clinic, they put in where you come in to register, there's the low section. But in the back, where the old section is, they're still
Yeah, this is happening.
extraordinarily high. They're like,
So,
Are there some other things that you could?
well, so Lisa, you were, talking about the, using the ADA internalized committee. I mean, you would have to go to them with, with that as a, this is an opportunity for you to take, a leadership role in the Champaign-Urbana area. I mean, right now, we know that there's one hospital in the Chicago area that's doing it, and and there just aren't enough hospitals. This is a chance for you to really distinguish yourself.
Yeah.
So you gotta give them an opportunity to see that this is a way for them to really get some good press and some blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so I mean, the ADA, task force within the hospital that is a combination of their staff and you guys. And then I cannot stress enough, Claudia, that this whole thing of really finding some private attorneys. I think, in the past, people have always thought, well, if they don't know the ADA or if they don't know disability, then we can't use them. Just start, just anybody that's willing to learn with you, because as they grow with you, they'll see more and more, and you'll be able to use them over the years.
Right. Now, the contact person, if you contact Rush, who really was helpful and very instrumental in getting this ADA
Hospital community.
hospital committee together, and it's mentioned, Judy has it mentioned in the white paper, is Beverly Huckman, and she's a good person.
And she knows both of
To
us.
talk
You
to
can use our names, just tell her that we came down to work with you guys and that that you saw their program in the white paper and that you're working with your hospitals here. I mean, they're on email. She will email you. I think they emailed a lot of their stuff to us.
That's neat. Thank you, I think that's a cool idea, and I do think Lisa's right, that with the current context of Pravina being sort of under the microscope for all kinds of things, that, it might be a good opportunity, and they might be able to see it that way. The other thing is that their vice president, who we've been talking to, Pat Davis-Hagan, who sometimes doesn't follow through all the way on everything, but one of the things that I know that they have been working on was, before we even got started, was on getting new wheelchairs and stuff like that, because they were seeing, more larger patients, and that they didn't have, and they're redesigning rooms and, just getting more equipment and stuff to accommodate, folks.
Now, do you have a rehab hospital in town here? I mean,
there's like units.
is the unit at Carl, pretty much?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, we don't want you to feel too bad about what's happening
Bigger
here,
ones.
because they built, I don't know how many millions, $40 million gorgeous new hospital at Northwestern. And when we went over there, we found that the examination rooms were so small. Brand new hospital in a major city, unlimited dollars practically, and we could barely fit in there.
Yeah.
And we still haven't had one major lawsuit against Northwestern. In fact, when Mary Lou Breslin came out to Chicago, she said, why not? That's why I sat there and told you guys all the reasons why people don't file these complaints. It's a lot. But,
And we found, I just learned that one of our own staff at the Health Resource Center has been dropped by healthcare providers.
and won't report it
And won't
because she
report
likes the position. We
And it
all
wasn't
love
the
this
physician
one
that
physician.
dropped her.
We love this
Yeah.
physician.
You know,
He's
so these
great,
things
but-
do,
Yeah, I mean, you guys know this stuff's happening. you
Yeah.
know.
Well, the thing on that, one of the things about like the building, you know, rooms that are too small and all that, that's really where I think we can also find common cause with nurses and other people because I know that that's one of the things that happened when my partner Jeff was in the hospital. He had colon cancer and all that, and he was recovering. And it was just amazing to see the nurses sort of like squeezing themselves around all the equipment and all that. And they were saying, you know, these are our newly designed rooms, and they didn't consult us. And if they had consulted us, you know, and there's more and more equipment and all of that, we would have had it done very differently. And that's what also some of what we were hearing from the Provena people. So there's also room for like common cause with the people who are actually working with the
Right,
patients.
yeah,
So we can be
absolutely.
advocating for their voice in the process as well.
You know, we were talking about other things here. You really, you know, you had emailed me about you know, making this more of a universal design issue, which I think you can do. I mean, we generally know that people that are obese, people that are elderly, people that are arthritic, that don't always identify themselves as people with disabilities, have the same exact issues, but probably even have less of a sense of entitlement or discrimination than even a lot of us with disabilities have. So it's a question of, I don't know how organized, you know, some of, or how much access you would have to people through your group that would want to help you make these, you know, this, I think you can do it without making it a universal case, but I think that when you're pitching the equipment thing, you can always say this is gonna, you know, benefit elderly people and obese people and people that just have general problems accessing standard medical equipment. As I said, I don't think you need necessarily to have all that, those stories on board, you know, to, the other thing I wanted to say in following up on the ADA task force, because you were asking me about other ideas. See, ever since we started the Women's Center, we've always had what we call community board meetings. And we're in our little Women's Center, they're always, you know, disabled women, and we're setting our priorities. We meet 3 to 4 times a year. I think that it's very important that there is, mostly because it coincides with the mission of your group, that there are, you know, there is some kind of regular, you know, scheduled community meetings with the hospital that are open, you know, on these issues. If that's a function of the ADA task force, I don't know what it would be, but I think we, you know, just so it's a real community. I don't know what the task force will come up with, and I don't know what Rush's model is. I don't know how they work it. They probably have a closed committee after they get their certain members on it.
I think it, I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I don't know, but you could ask.
But don't forget, I mean, Rush is just a template for you guys to start looking at, because in the end, what you do might look very different than what they do, but the concept is a solid one, at least from the beginning. And it'll be interesting to see what you grow into. So the ADA committee, the lawyers, the stories, anything else? We were talking a little bit about media when we were out of the room. I actually feel like media is part of your leverage, and I try to save it until you know you feel like you're at a point where you might be able to use it as leverage. You don't have to use it as leverage, but I always have my stories lined up.
Yeah, that's one of the things we talked about at the retreat. You know that we want to, I mean, there are, whenever we meet, people are telling stories or have talked to somebody who's had an experience and all of that. So we had talked about one of the things that we should probably do, and we do this with some of our other work, is, you know, to do story banking.
Right.
Work, you know, and part of it is working with the person and also knowing what information can be shared. Would they be willing to speak to the media directly, and working with people to, you know, so that they feel comfortable doing that and stuff like that, but start having sort of organized information on people who are willing to share.
Okay, and the other piece I was gonna ask you about that I talked to Bill and Barbara about a little bit on the phone is, other than the folks that are here, do you think there's much of a need for more education and outreach to to people with chronic illnesses, people with disabilities in this area around these issues?
I think especially as we get more organized, it's good to have people you can tap into. I mean, this is a small group, relatively. It's a good size for working.
I mean, would the Silk work with you? Not the Silk, the Independent Living Center.
Well, who knows?
The Silk, would they work with you?
Oh, they're a shining example in this community, I'll tell you that right now.
All right. So they're not, like, they're not gonna partner with you?
They may do some stuff, but they won't come to ODA for them.
That's all right, but they would put something in
Yeah.
their
They
newsletter.
would put
and
something
they
in
would-
their newsletter, but they're not a radical group by any stretch of
Okay,
the imagination.
but I think that you guys gotta develop a strategy to start bringing in more folks that are either living with disabilities or some kind of chronic health situation where they are, you know, experiencing these kinds of challenges in the healthcare setting. I mean, right now, it seems like it's word of mouth, like you're a newcomer, but there might want to be, because I still think that a lot of the issue is that those of us living with disabilities who are like professional patients get so used to being mistreated that we don't even understand anymore, this isn't appropriate. Getting examined in your chair is not safe. It's, you know, it's an ADA violation. There's stuff that's been reinforced mostly for people that have grown up as kids with disabilities, that they've experienced and been reinforced throughout their whole life, and they're not even thinking about it as something that they should be challenging. So there needs to be some education within the disability, and I say chronic illness too, community. So that's another piece that you would want to develop.
One of the things that we decided also at the retreat is to come up with a handout that we can talk about, what the problem is, what we're trying to do about it, let people know it can be, you know, it can work for, you know, for that, and also, you know, let people know who they can call if they're having problems, or, you know, find ways to engage people. But the only reason we haven't done that yet is because, you know, part of it from an organizing perspective is, you know, that we want to do the education, and you're talking about sort of a consciousness raising thing as well. But then the other thing is, you know, to engage people into what, and we're sort of figuring out, you know, the what. But I think Barb and Lynn and Lisa, is that right, are going to work on the handout, and then that's something that hopefully we can use as an outreach tool.
Email
So
us a
that
draft.
handout you're saying would
Email
go
us
to the
draft.
consumers?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's a real rights issue. These are your rights.
yeah, exactly.
When you
Yeah,
go,
I
when you
think,
go to meet with the
you know,
healthcare
just,
provider.
yeah, even that one-handed thing that we just say, if you're thinking of doing a newsletter on this, you know, this is, has this ever happened to you, I mean, or whatever, this is your right, if this has happened to you, one of these kind of like, this is right, this is wrong kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is acceptable, this is unacceptable,
Yeah,
this is,
yeah.
this is a quality of care issue, this is not a quality of care issue.
Yeah.
Not
Maybe like
accept
Q&A
being
or
dropped
something.
on the floor.
What?
Don't accept being dropped on the floor, no matter how much you
Right.
like the person who dropped you. There should be equipment or something that they can use to not drop people.
And don't accept being examined in your chair.
Right.
And another thing is, if you've got a hearing impairment or a language, I mean, I don't know how you guys are doing with foreign translators, or, you know, language interpreters.
That's an issue.
I mean, interpreters are part of JACO. I mean, I know you can't even get JACO certified unless I think you show that you
That's right.
have, you know, Joint Commission of
Yeah.
Hospital Accreditation. unless you can show that you've got accommodations for hearing impaired.
You know who's written, you remember who's written about this a lot? June Isaacson Kales.
Right. Well, her stuff is in here.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you've got that. Because you can look at that as.
Her website is good. Wait, let's pull her out for you, because we've given you Rush. I gotta get my glasses.
Because she
And
she
she's
did this
also
whole
the one
thing
promoting.
about how, when you go to see your doctor, what do you need to do to prepare to go to see your doctor? And one of the things is take a friend with you, especially if you get nervous, you can't remember things, take a tape recorder with you, and don't let them say that's against HIPAA.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. Know what your meds are, ask these questions, a whole list.
Yeah.
So that's something you might want to look at.
There should be, there may be in here
She's on the
a
website.
checklist,
Yeah.
the TDD, or
Is there something already, we want to produce our own,
Yeah, but you might want to do.
but is there something already being done that does have your basic rights in it?
In the healthcare setting, I think the DOG does. We
So
have
like,
just
is there
this-
something like, we
Department
can
of
use that's
Justice?
real simple, yeah,
Yeah, I think so.
okay,
I
DOG?
think,
But one of the things you might do, actually,
look in here,
Is-
under the DOJ, the Department of Justice Resources.
yeah, but you might look actually at the Rehab Institute website and go into the Life Center, which I think is Education and Consumer Services is one of the
lifestyle?
tabs. It's just ric.org,
Okay.
www.ric.org, and then on their homepage, it doesn't say Life Center, which is stupid. On their different tabs, I think it says Education and Consumer Services or Education and Advocacy. Anyway, when you click on that tab, what opens up is the Life Center homepage. And in that Life Center homepage are lots of things, and you'll find legal information, and you may find one of those disability or, rights sheets. They have a lot of printed stuff.
I gotta find you.
Good.
Because
Just
like the
something to check.
hospital will hand you out stuff, but it's embedded in all their other things, and like for the interpreters for language and stuff, I go to Carl, I don't go to Venus, I can only go through now. It has a lot of that in it, but I think it would be helpful if we could give people with disabilities
Yeah.
their own, because,
I agree
I've
with you.
run into it where they said, oh, you didn't bring someone to assist you in getting,
Right.
like, and I told them point blank, I don't have to, you have to provide
That's
it.
true.
Right.
How many people are gonna do that?
That's exactly right.
Okay, on the resource page here, Barbara, okay, I'm gonna read this, because this is June's group. They have a great website, it's
It
called
is.
the Center for Disability Issues and the Health Professions. Okay, it's on page 43 of the white paper, and there's actually, I'll tell you, the two real key resources on page 43 are, the first one being the Center for Disability Issues and the Health Professions. Just go to their website, number one. And Barbara, you can always either email them or call them and ask them if they have any one-page handouts Okay. that you can draw from. You can use my name. I know the woman over there is named June Isaacson Kales.
Okay.
Now, she's working with this other group at Marquette.
Right.
Now, do you see this Marquette? Now, what this is this Marquette issue. Marquette University is a NIDER funded, it's federally funded money going into designing accessible hospital equipment. Okay, and so this group, this Center for Disability Issues in the Health Professions, is working directly with this university-based research project to get bioengineering, to get produce more accessible hospital equipment. So I would encourage you to, we're gonna have to leave pretty soon. I'm gonna try to sum up some of our recommendations, and Ginger can help me out here. I encourage you to definitely get in touch with Rush Beverly Huckman here. The Department of Justice, go to their website, which should be in here, and also page 43, the Center for Disability and Health Professions, to start, in terms of starting to create your own materials. And then also with regard to the attorneys, I cannot stress enough, you guys need some solid legal stuff. People that can grow with you on this, you know, I mean, you'll find them. They'll kind of start coming to you somewhere along the line, and once you start, and then
And the attorneys who are going to research all of the architectural barriers in the state of Illinois and federal. Go ahead.
And then you really need to do more community outreach into the disability community. And sometimes all you need to do is provide the food and start telling stories and listen to people's stories. I mean, usually, one or two of you guys can just start telling your stories. One thing we know about storytelling is when somebody tells a story, it automatically, psychologically triggers other stories in people. It's how we started the Women's Center. We just got together a few times, and we just kept exchanging stories. And so what you basically want to do is start, getting more people in this area to just hear their stories. So you don't have to talk about getting them on board with any big thing. You just want to offer them, the opportunity to tell their stories. And, I think, that's what we did, and it kind of grew from there. And I think that, was there anything else that we talked about? We talked about media as kind of being part of the leverage later on.
Yeah, well, and then just trying to see if you, in these different clinics or hospitals,
Oh, in-services.
identifying, yes, well, but before you can do the in-service, you need to identify a couple of people who
Yeah,
are going to be with you.
you're going to need to identify your internal advocates in
Yeah,
every
you need
setting.
internal advocates, and then you want to be able to do some in-services.
Yeah, down the road, you'll want to do in-services because they're not going to know.
And I would suggest that you don't want to start with the press until, because this just happened, in fact, in Chicago with Mayor Daley, who said, well, if you people had come to me, I would have addressed that issue. Why did you go to the press?
We talked about that at our retreat.
And so you want to make sure that you've gone to those people
Right.
first,
Right.
and they've said no
Right.
before you go to the
Right.
press.
But there's something else, and this is in the event that you ever get to litigation. One of the things we learned with transportation is that judges read the newspaper.
Yeah.
Okay? So sometimes it's helpful to save your press until you're at the point where they've said no, they've stonewalled you, and you are about either ready to start a litigation process. Because I remember our attorneys, Kate, what was her name? Kate Yanius, she kept saying, judges read papers, get those stories in the papers. So sometimes we were pretty judicious about how we used our press just with regard to that.
Right.
Here we are telling them how to sue. We haven't even sued a healthcare center. We have not filed one healthcare lawsuit in Chicago yet.
Right, but you want to document every.
So maybe you guys will inspire us.
You want to document every meeting that you have or
No,
try to have
we have
with
tons
these
of problems.
officials, and so that you've got some solid evidence if you go to the press
Right.
that they can use.
Yeah.
Because if it's just he said, she said,
Right.
that carries no weight at all.
Yeah. We usually try to get the communications in writing.
And then the last thing, which we're just telling everybody, and I told Barbara and Bill on the phone, and I'm telling everybody in Chicago, is we know it's a lot of work to file a DOJ complaint when there's this violation of your civil rights. Of course, people don't know that their rights are being violated, so that's part of your one-page handout. Somehow they've got to be educated that they have that right to file that complaint. Because when we did this paper, I don't remember the numbers, go back and look, there's like just
Yeah.
there was like nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, there were, what, 75, 100, DOG complaints, and they were mostly around sign language interpreters. There were very few, people are just not filing the complaints, and it's not helping us.
Right. That was actually a very helpful fact, because we just had a meeting with Carl Hospital the other day, and one of the things that we had been asking them is when you put out your information, this is focusing on medical data, their billing and collections and all that, but when people call to get help, that they need to publicize the TTY number or whatever.
Right.
And it had been 2 months since we last met with them, and they were like, oh, what's this thing about the TTY? Can you remind us? And I said, well, we said when you print up your pamphlets and all that, that if somebody needs to call with a question about their bill or to find out if they qualify for, you know, the discount program or whatever, you should be, as well as you put your phone number, you should put the TTY number on there. And they were like, do we have one to the billing office? And it was this little discussion, and I said, you know, I just read this thing, it's really amazing. I know you'll want to do this just because it's the right thing to do, but I just read this book, and I mentioned your book, and said that, you know, that a bunch of the complaints that had been filed with the Department of Justice and the lawsuits that had been filed were actually, you know, I said the deaf community is very activist oriented, and this is something that folks locally have been pushing for a long time. I said, that's not a threat, I just think you want to do that, you know, whatever.
Do you want to do that?
Just a veiled threat, not a real threat.
Yeah. But they said, yeah, we should do that. So they're not that expensive, you might just want to get one for the billing department.
So stay in touch with us. If there's
will.
anything that you guys put together, just email me. Claudia's got my email and Ginger's, and you know, and as I said, you may help inspire us. I mean, you know, why aren't there? Why aren't there lawsuits in Chicago on healthcare? We might have. We're trying to like start collecting stories right now. I understand. Ginger's telling me we've got one attorney in our independent living center who seems to be wanting to talk to people. I think one of the sticky things in Chicago, just for the heck of it, is that RIC, the rehab hospital we work with, he has a Northwestern connection, and I think that so many of us have had problems at Northwestern, and it's going to be real dicey if we ever come out and litigate against Northwestern.
It is.
But it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So you never know, you might be inspiring us. Writing your own paper, and we'll have you come up to Chicago and tell us how to do it.
Well, the paper is fabulous.
It's just such an honor to be here, and I mean, Ginger and I, we spend our lives with grassroots. We're out on the street most of the time, so it's fun to be here in another town.
Well, thank y'all
And
so
we'll help
much.
you any way we can, and what I said to Barbara is that our hospital is behind this, and they are into helping us get national press on this, and I feel like if this paper plays any role in making any changes, then we can, you know, work with you on helping get the word out to both of us. I'm gonna stop off at the ladies' room. Does anybody have any closing comments or questions before we take off?
I just wanted to tell you that you and I talked, one of our members, Rebecca Benke, is involved with the Illinois Occupational Therapy Association, and she had asked me to ask Judy if she would be willing to work with Rebecca on possibly presenting at the Illinois Occupational Therapy Conference next fall, because Rebecca's really involved.
Yeah, it's up in Chicago.
Yeah, she asked actually if we could help connect y'all on
That would be
email.
wonderful.
Okay.
I did get an invitation just a couple weeks ago to present on this paper at the Department of Health and Human Services in DC. This was when I came back from Phoenix. I was shocked. It was Departments of Disability and Women's Health that are holding a conference. So I kind of like it because I go from the grassroots to the policy, you know, and what I was thinking is when I got there is I was going to talk to them about this meeting.
Yeah.
Because this is like,
Yeah,
it's bottom up,
exactly.
you know. So thank you once again.
And continue having some of these little coffees or focus groups with consumers, and whether, you know, may start out with just meeting with 3 or 4 people in the community, but we'll find them.
Yeah.
Oh, they're out there.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, thank y'all
Thank
very
you.
much.
Oh, I don't mind. Nice and warm.
Yeah.
Jazz.
Well, yeah.